Good morning, High Rock. I'm Dave. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm so glad we get to open up the scriptures together today. You know, many of us have spent many years in school, and we remember having lots of homework. At the end of class, our teachers would give us assignments that they expected us to complete before the next class meeting. And my kids are in the middle of that now. Every afternoon, my 3 elementary-aged boys play and snack for a little bit before starting their homework. They're learning addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. And while they all begin earnestly, on most days, one of them eventually just tosses up his pencil and slouches back in his chair, defeated, and just announces, I can't do this. It's impossible. And I bring this up because today, we're reading about an assignment that Jesus has given us. And yet lots of us given up because it just feels impossible. And Jesus was a teacher who spent 3 years teaching people about God, forgiveness, truth, eternity, and love. But between his miraculous resurrection from the dead and his return to heaven, Jesus gave his students, which includes most of us, one final assignment that he expected us to complete before our next meeting. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Jesus wants us to pass on to others what he taught to us. Teach them about forgiveness, confession, repentance, trust, love, prayer, serving, and finding new life by following Jesus. When I was a new Christian, I experienced firsthand having my life changed by Jesus. And I was eager to share it. But I was also a bit rough around the edges. I had just begun following Jesus, so I hadn't yet dealt with my arrogance or competitiveness. So sometimes I'd tell others about Jesus, and if they offered resistance, I went into argument mode, determined to win. And because I spent so much time studying all of this before I became a Christian, I often won those debates. But I didn't make many disciples because I was a bit of a know-it-all. I was telling them about Jesus, but I sure wasn't showing them Jesus because as a brand new Christian myself, I was the same self-centered, materialistic bully that I'd been before. Now I was the self-centered, materialistic Christian bully. So few people expressed interest in learning about Jesus from me. After enough of these bad experiences, kind of like my kids struggling with their homework, eventually I just gave up. People don't want to become Christians, I concluded. People aren't interested in Jesus or new life, and this assignment is impossible. Maybe you've had an experience like that. You want to share God's good news with people that you care about because you know how blessed they'd be by it, just like you have been. But it seems impossible. In fact, today it can seem more impossible than ever. Hundreds of headlines insist that Christianity is dying in America. No one goes to church anymore. Young people aren't interested in religion these days. We've come to believe that our schools and workplaces, even our families, are hostile to the gospel. If I mention church or Jesus to any of my friends, they might get angry. Better keep my mouth shut, not let anybody know I'm a Christian, lest I get labeled as backward or a bigot. Instead of wanting to share, we're more worried about surviving this onslaught of secularism. We know that Jesus sent us out to make disciples and make a difference in the world, but these days it just seems impossible. So we give up. We're scared into silence. In that light, it seems a bit ridiculous to talk about expanding our facilities. I know we're crowded now, but by the time we're done with this whole project, no one's going to want to come to church anymore. So making more space just seems foolish. The truth is that there are challenges to sharing the good news about God's love and transforming power demonstrated in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But those challenges may not be what you think they are. So today, I'm going to preach a great sermon. Now, I know what you're thinking, Dave, it could be great if it were a short sermon. But I'm not going to give you that kind of great sermon. No, it's going to be a great sermon in the sense that we're going to look at 5 great Bible passages. So it's actually going to be 5 great sermons, and each one will be short. So if you like short sermons, this is your day. You're going to get 5 of them. Yay, all right. Now, it's not really 5 sermons, right? The addition and subtraction and multiplication and division that my kids are learning are each distinct, but they're all needed to do basic math in that same way. My real goal is to show you how these 5 passages all combine to make sharing Jesus' good news a lot less impossible. We are already partway there because the first of these Bible passages is the one we've already talked about. This verse is commonly called the Great Commission. It was Jesus' final assignment in which he sent us on a mission to make a difference in the world by making disciples of Jesus. And given how acrimonious and violent and hopeless our world is today, can you imagine what a wonderful difference it could make if more people learned to love and forgive and trust God and serve each other like Jesus does? But if we rush off to do what Jesus instructed, we're probably going to fail, like I did when I first became a Christian. It would be like my kids picking up the assignment at the beginning of a class period and then skipping the rest of class where they learn how to do it. Well, then of course the assignment's going to feel impossible. And that's where these other great verses come in. Remember, the Great Commission about making disciples is the last thing Jesus said. So we're only going to know how to complete this assignment if we listen to what Jesus taught us before that. Indeed, the very thing Jesus told us to teach others is all of the stuff that Jesus taught us. But that's a lot of stuff. You got your Beatitudes and your Sermon on the Mount, and there's the parables and the miracles, all have some kind of message kind of just baked right into them. And then there's all the conversations Jesus had that we can learn a ton from. So where do we begin? Actually, Jesus made it pretty easy because he summarized it for us in Matthew 22. When someone asked Jesus to name the greatest commandment, see, there it is, another one of our great verses. This really is a great sermon, right? Okay, when someone asked Jesus to name the greatest commandment, he replied with the text of our second great sermon. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So if you want to boil down everything Jesus taught into the most basic form possible, this is it. Love God and love others. And we could talk a long time about both of these, but I promised 5 mini sermons today, so I'm going to skip past most of that, except to show how Jesus' greatest commandment is necessary to fulfill Jesus' great commission. If you were to ask, it would be easy for me to sell you on the benefits of cooking steak sous vide, which is a fancy name for cooking in a water bath. Usually steak in the oven or on a grill is either overcooked and dry or undercooked, which makes it dangerous. Getting it perfect is almost impossible because in order to cook the middle adequately, you have to overcook the rest of it, which basically ruins your steaks. But this year, I started using a sous vide, which lets you choose the exact temperature the entire steak will be. Recently, I also bought a legit flamethrower to give it a nice sear at the end. Okay, well, it's not quite like this. It's more like this. But, it is still cool. And the steaks come out perfect every time. Now I never order steak anymore at restaurants because I can make it better at home. I love it. I first tried sous vide because one of my friends used it and he raved. The food tasted amazing. You might have never heard of sous vide before, but admit it, you're at least a little interested now, because my enthusiasm is infectious. Or at the very least, you're interested in the flamethrower. Tell me you're not interested in the flamethrower. Okay, we'll talk about that another time. Likewise, the most effective way to interest others in Jesus is to genuinely love him myself. My arguments for Jesus will never be as winsome as my affection for Jesus. So if you want to become more effective in sharing your faith, focus first on fanning into flame your love for Jesus by spending time talking with him and learning from him and enjoying him. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He says the second greatest commandment is like the first in that they're pretty much almost the same thing. Humans are made in God's image. So the way we feel about people is the way that we feel about God. When American and Iraqi civilians pulled down the Saddam Hussein statue after the Iraq War, no one interpreted that as a general protest against statues as an inferior art form. It expressed their disdain for the person in whose image that statue had been made. In the same way, John, one of Jesus' first disciples, explains that whoever claims to love God and yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen can't love God whom they've not seen. And he has also given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother or sister. If we're all made in God's image, do you see that loving others and ourselves is basically the same thing as loving God? It's this conviction that inspired high rocker Gene Ciccarella to start a ministry caring for refugees who are waiting at our border. It's what inspires many high rockers to deliver food and friendship each week to our neighbors down in Menotomy Manor. It's why I've seen political conservatives and political liberals at High Rock really listen to each other and love each other, even if they still don't agree, because God takes personally the way that we treat each other and the way that we talk about each other. It's why when an African family studying in the U.S. was abruptly evicted recently, High Rockers offered money and toys and clothing to help them. It's why so many High Rockers have extended hospitality to strangers by inviting in lonely international students for dinner. It's why so many families here have adopted foster children in order to give them a forever family. Stories like these happen every single week here at High Rock because God is transforming the way that we see each other. This truth has applications for racism and sexism and income inequality and homophobia and the incarceration crisis. But for our purposes today, I simply want to point out that we can't make disciples of anyone until we truly love them. If I'd been less determined to convince people and more committed to truly caring for people in my first year as a Christian, those failed conversations I had about Jesus probably would have gone much better than they did. As the old adage goes, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. So my point is that we can't achieve Jesus' great commission to welcome new people into Jesus' family unless we take to heart his great commandment to love people first. And this should be easy, because in my experience, most Christians truly do have a lot of compassion for others. It's beautiful. The problem is that too often our love is limited by our selfishness and our fear. And so we need to have some kind of great challenge to love people like Jesus does, which is our third mini sermon. Recently, a church that was slowly dying asked me to help them figure out what might be wrong. And they were mystified that more people didn't join their church because they are so nice. So I sent one of my friends as an undercover spy to see what it's really like. And he confirmed they really are very nice to each other. They chatted with each other happily, but even though he was the only newcomer in a very small congregation, not a single person talked to him. They were too busy catching up with their friends after a long week because they love those people. Now, I admit, I love catching up with my friends on Sunday too. Some of my favorite people in the world are here, and I never get enough time with them. But I also realize that Sunday, like every day, needs to be about more than just me. Now, all of us agree with that. We want to bless others, but honestly, often ourselves get in the way. What I want for you, well, gets crowded out by what I want for me. I hate that so many people around the world struggle to get basic nutrition and clean water. I want to help, but I need a tropical vacation this winter because you know how brutal Boston winters can be. I want to volunteer to serve on Sundays, but I also need to be available in case I'm invited to do something cool next weekend. I want to donate towards making more space at High Rock for newcomers, but I also want to build a house addition on my house this spring. I want to talk to that lonely person at school or work, or reach out to that person who I know just suffered a loss. But I also want to catch up on my email, or just have a night to myself to binge on Netflix. These are the kinds of choices that we have to make every day. Some big, others small. But each one is a choice between serving others and serving myself. And this is why Jesus issues his great challenge. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. At the moment Jesus said this, he was moving towards Jerusalem to be crucified to save people who hated him and defeat death forever. Now, if you told me you were going to go to Ben & Jerry's and you invited me to follow you, well, I might come, because, who doesn't love ice cream? But if you were going to go sacrifice your life and invited me to follow you, I might not be so eager. We want more abundant life from Jesus, not more sacrifice. A lot of us like to call ourselves followers of Jesus. But this is what it actually means to follow him. It means to see what he does and do the same thing. It means being willing to love those you don't think deserve it. It means to serve those who can't serve you back. It means to forgive the people who hurt you. Or to trust God in every situation. It means to risk sharing your faith with somebody who might reject you. If we're honest, look at a list like that and think, that sounds terrible. Why would anybody want to do that? Picking up your cross, isn't that choosing death? Why would anyone want to do that? Because this is Jesus' secret to finding the life you actually want. Our society is committed to serving ourselves, and yet we're increasingly hopeless and depressed. So we just serve ourselves more, and it only gets worse. In many cases, depression is a medical issue that needs professional help. But for some of us, we're just not making investments into the things that bring true joy. 2,000 years ago, Jesus explained the surprising secret to full life. Whoever wants to save their life, don't lose it. Whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Loving others is not only necessary if we're going to help people discover Jesus, it's also, ironically, the best way to serve yourself. Because other-centered joy, not self-centered joy, other-centered joy is the only joy that satisfies or endures. Taking pleasure in giving pleasure to another is the key to marriage and parenting and friendship and life. It's what makes our lives feel meaningful. So the key to joy and fulfilling Jesus' assignment for us is to love God by loving others, which sounds great, but none of us can sustain that for very long. Despite our desires to react with grace or speak the truth or help those in need, the magnetic pull of our own selfishness and fear is just too strong. It keeps drawing us back into our own little orbits. Something needs to change. And it isn't just our behavior or level of determination. No, we need to be changed by Jesus from the inside out so that loving people and responding with grace and trusting God become more natural for us. In that spirit, Paul writes about the great change that we need to experience so that God can use us to bring change to the world that he loves. Paul urges, don't conform to the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's common to say that we need to be the change that we want to see. You know, I laughed a little sadly this week because about a month ago, a woman interrupted a public meeting in Tucson to demand that immigrants should be deported if they break our laws. And, you know, I guess that's a reasonable position, but this otherwise unremarkable story went viral because of the hashtag green shirt guy caught on video laughing at her self-righteousness, and it spread all over the internet. I mean, it was everywhere, but, you know, okay, whatever, story's over. But this week, she was arrested because she'd stolen an old lady's identity in order to take her hotel points so that she could attend a music festival out of state. The woman who insisted others obey American laws was breaking them herself. And isn't this just what some Christians do? We tell other people to behave in ways that we don't. We tell others to be generous when we spend our own money on ourselves. We tell others that marriage must be held sacred, but then we treat our own spouses flippantly or unkindly. We tell others to trust God when they're worried, but when we're worried, we trust in money or try to take control. We loudly protest against poverty or discrimination, but then we do very little to end them because that would cost us too much. We lament the impotence of our politicians to address climate change as we turn up the air conditioning in our SUVs. We tell others to love everybody, but then we discriminate against those who don't share our political positions or our convictions about human sexuality. No wonder the world isn't interested in hearing what Christians say because they're not seeing it in us. Moreover, we're missing out on the life that Jesus made possible by living in that same empty, depressing, self-centered way that everybody else does. Friends, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Be transformed. We want to experience for ourselves what we desire for others. Transformation by God. I don't want to just, tell people what I've heard others say following Jesus and being changed by Jesus is like. I want to share what it has been like for me because I've experienced it. And I have experienced it. I am different than I used to be. I'm less afraid. I'm less angry. I'm less self-absorbed. I truly care about people and can forgive in ways I just could not before. And he's got a long way to go, but God has been changing me. Honestly, each step along the way requires a little death. It's death to my selfishness, death to my pride, death to my wanting to be right, get my own way. But after the initial sting, surprisingly, each of those deaths feels like freedom and new life. I've seen these same changes in thousands of people at High Rock over the years. I've seen truths told and forgiveness extended and relationships reconciled and addictions defeated and sacrifices made that made a difference for people in need. I've seen bridges built between people that our society usually builds walls between, including people of different ethnicities, or economic groups, or education levels. If you've been here for very long, you have seen that too. This August, someone asked me, in what ways do people actually become different at High Rock? And I wasn't sure what to say. I mean, I know people are changed in wonderful ways. I just never taken the time to define it precisely, other than to say, well, they become more like Jesus. So over the past few months, I've been asking scores of High Rockers, how have you been changed? How has God transformed you here? And I've been keeping a list of the common themes. Now, it's still wet cement, and it's too small for you to see on this screen, but here's my list. These are the ways that people are being changed by God's Spirit through this community. And it's the change we want to share with others because we found it to be the way to new life that's going to last forever. These are the keys to a life of faith and freedom and meaning and joy. It's been a lot of fun hearing these stories and putting this list together. And after it's finalized, you're going to see much more of this list because we're going to start using it to shape our preaching and our small groups, our Kids Rock ministries, and our youth group ministries, and design our discipleship. We want to be more deliberate about addressing anything that's hindering us from experiencing all that Christ has made possible. And all of this is key to completing the assignment Jesus gave us. Once we're filled with love for God and love for others, we're freed from our selfishness so that we can serve, and we're actively experiencing the difference Jesus makes. Then it makes sense to go share this good news with others, like Jesus told us to in the Great Commission. And now we've got more than ideas and doctrines to share. We have experiences to bring them to life. Now, I wish that's all we needed to make disciples and complete the assignment that Jesus gave us. But the truth is that few people actually become Christians because somebody shared their faith with them. How it more frequently happens is that some Christian, like you, is living and loving in such a compelling and Christ-like way at home or at school and your workplace that non-Christians start to trust and enjoy you. People need to see that they're loved and that we have been transformed in a way that they find appealing. Next, we need to be willing to talk about our faith. Now, I understand your reticence about sharing your faith. We have been told so many times, nobody wants to hear it. But that's just not true. Recently, I read the results of a large-scale, scientifically valid survey of unchurched millennials, exactly the group that we keep being told are disinterested in Jesus. But friends, we were told wrong. Well, okay, I admit, it is a little true. 6% of those surveyed said that they would be upset or annoyed if someone shared their faith in a conversation. But I mean, that is only a little true. I mean, 6%. 79% are happy to discuss with a faith with a friend or family member. Now, not a stranger. So we have to invest enough time to actually care, to be genuine friends. What's strange, however, is despite their interest, 79% of people like to have those conversations. 71% of those people have never had someone explain Christianity to them, probably because most Christians are convinced that nobody wants to hear. But that's not true. Most unchurched people are open to a conversation about faith, but that's not usually enough to inspire somebody to follow Jesus. The third step is needed, which is to invite them to church. It turns out that in most cases, fulfilling Jesus' assignment is impossible by yourself. Most people have more questions than you can answer on your own and need to see more examples of the way that God can heal and bless and use people than just yours. They need to experience God's kingdom through Christian community. So most people have to belong to a spiritual community like High Rock before they come to believe in Jesus and follow him themselves. But that means that we need to invite people, which we're reluctant to do because we're convinced that nobody wants to come. However, it turns out that 55% of those unchurched millennials said they would respond positively if a friend or family member invited them to church. And in what was the most surprising statistic in this survey, at least to me, of these millennials who don't go to church, 39% of them already expect to regularly attend church at some point in the future. They're already planning on it. Too bad their friends and family members aren't inviting them. Church, those friends and family members, that's us. We're not inviting them, even though most people are far more open than you expect. Now, I'll be the first to admit that some sermons are better than others, and some worship sets are better than others. But we put a lot of effort into every Sunday service because we're committed to never embarrassing you. If you take the risk to invite someone who's interested in Jesus, even on our worst weeks, I hope that we will never embarrass you. We want you to trust us to welcome your friends and family members well. Because one of the most important moments in someone's journey towards Jesus can be the first 5 minutes in church. Being the new person anywhere can be awkward, especially when everybody else seems to know each other and know exactly what they're supposed to do and say. I went to a birthday party about a week and a half ago for a guy at my gym. He and I have become sort of friends, and I admit I was a bit nervous beforehand because the whole event it was like so unfamiliar to me. It was going to be held in a private room at the gym at 8 p.m. So I wasn't sure what to wear. Like, should I show up in my sweats or a suit? And besides that, I wasn't sure I'd know anyone or what the vibe would be like. I really had to psych myself up in order to go, and that was just a birthday party. But that awkwardness is only exacerbated in church, where newcomers worry not only about what to wear or what it'll be like from what they've seen about Christians on TV, they worry about being judged by others or by God. So we need to bend over backwards to make them feel welcome, because people decide pretty quickly whether they feel welcome and safe. And at High Rock, too often, despite our best intentions, they don't. The video earlier described just a few of the challenges we have, including not enough seats in the sanctuary, space in Kids Rock, or the happy chaos of the fellowship downstairs after service. It's clear that we haven't made space for them, which makes them feel unwelcome. And yet, as hospitable as we are in our hearts, our physical space isn't hospitable to newcomers as it feels to us, right? The same crowding that makes it feel cozy for those of us who already feel comfortable here, that same crowding feels intimidating and alienating to anyone new. And that's why we're investing in more space. Right now, our facilities are so full, from Sunday mornings to Kids Rock to Moms Rocks to small groups to youth groups. It's no wonder we're reluctant to invite people. There's just no space. We want to make more space so that we can hear more stories of the way that God is changing lives here at High Rock. Over the next 2 months, you're going to hear lots of those stories. We hope to have a new, inspiring video every week about what God is doing here. Next week, you'll hear about the astounding way God is moving in our Japanese ministry. And after that, we'll hear from more people who have been transformed during their time here. And we want to make more space so that we can hear more of those stories in the years ahead. And this is why I want to close with the final and shortest of these 5 sermons, the Great Commitment. Mark tells the story of when so many people were crowding into a house to listen to Jesus that, it was crammed. There's just no more room. It sounds a little bit like High Rock on some Sunday mornings or Thursday nights or Friday nights, and I could go on. But 4 men were so determined to bring their friend to Jesus that they literally cut a hole in the roof to make more space. Friends, we want to love God so much that we have that same love for our friends, our family members, our coworkers, our classmates. A love that makes us willing to do whatever it takes to make space so that they can get closer to Jesus. And we're committed so committed to that goal that this year, with your help, we are literally going to cut holes in the roof and in the walls and in the floors in order to make more space so that more people, including internationals and the next generation and people who know almost nothing about God, can discover Jesus here at High Rock. And I can't wait to hear more stories about that. Let's pray.